Welcome to Talks. I believe this is our last talk of the summer. Although we try to have talks every week while classes are going on, we've noticed that during the summer people get interested in being outside too. So with that, these talks are a lot of fun for me to be part of, and I also want to encourage you guys to think about who you'd like to have come in the fall. We've had speakers from just every major and top quality institution you can think of, and lots of startups as well. And today's no exception. We have Todd Davies from Stanford speaking. What I want to think about is that the microphones in front of you are for asking questions, and I'm going to turn them to voice activated. That means that there's a light on in front of you, which means that if you rattle your keys and stuff, it'll be something that you can transmit. It's a way of expressing yourself to the rest of the community that's listening. But it means you can ask a question. There are people online on Adobe Connect watching this as well. And there's a legacy on our website of the 80 or so talks that we've recorded under Ron Robinson's great supervision. So ask questions at 2:20, 2:25 when you're done. We'll have questions, and then we'll go out, and anybody that's interested in getting to know Todd a little bit more, we have a few minutes where we can have some cookies and soda and discuss it. So Todd kind of runs the Symbolic Systems program at Stanford, associate director, and it's a very interesting program. He brought his students. There's a cadre of the most creative computer scientists at Stanford, undergraduates, that take this degree, and some of them have started gigantic and very, very profitable companies, which of course they've used to make you rich. Oh, sorry, they didn't. But in any case, it's a very nice, it's a very interesting program. Todd, in his own right, has a PhD in cognitive psychology from Stanford, and has been interested in deliberation as a research area, as far as I can tell. And he is making a tool for deliberation decision making in healthcare. Now, deliberation, he'll tell you, is a new field, and it's a very interesting field. There have been some incredible successes. Janoskovich, the big guy that brought us polling for voting. He is one of the people. What? Janoskovich? Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce his name. Is an example of somebody that's really started with this stuff and really created a new field, I think, although you're going to tell us. So with that, although I like to sit and talk, I really prefer to listen to Todd. And so thank you very much for coming, and yeah, hope you all enjoy it. I was just informed that actually this is not the very last talk of the summer. There's one on patents next week. I'm sorry, I was jumping the gun. So, and what often happens is, it was hard to get this talk series started, but now it's hard to stop it. So in fact, we sometimes get extra talks that we didn't anticipate. What's going on?
His screen's not sharing.
Yeah, so could that be, there's two ways to do it, right? Close it and open it again. Should you close Adobe or on his or not? I know. Sad. Sorry. We're happy. Good.
Wow. I want to thank Todd for inviting me here. Over the years in HCI, I've heard of many great projects about people bringing intelligence into cars, and computer scientists getting involved in designing voting systems, of smart kitchens, many other projects, and I didn't realize that all of those projects were due to Ted. So he was a hero before I even knew, he was a hero of mine before I even knew that he was identified with all these projects. I had heard his name, but wasn't close enough into the field to know all of the work that he's done. And it's an honor to speak here and to be introduced by Ted. What I'm going to describe is a project that has evolved quite a bit from its roots in 2003 when we started working on online deliberation as a topic and designing software to support online deliberation, originally with the thought of creating a test bed for experiments in deliberative techniques, to a long foray into developing software for the social web, which would support online deliberation, but which had to be built, we decided, from the ground up, because we wanted it to be a practical platform, something that's always dangerous for academics to attempt. And now it's come back to its roots in supporting deliberation in a project that we've been asked to do. So I'm going to talk about both the deliberative aspect and motivations behind the project and the tool that we developed. And if it seems a little disjointed between the two, that represents where we are. We started with this idea of supporting deliberation in software, took a long time to develop a content management framework for the social web, and now are adapting it back to our original purpose. And I have students who just started yesterday working for the summer on this, so you'll see that the talk just sort of ends where we are, which is trying to link up these two concepts, which were originally all part of the same idea. So we're going from this framework for the social web to supporting public deliberation, and I thought it would be good as a start to give some background on public deliberation, since I think that phrase, which has become a technical term in certain circles, may not be familiar to many people, but it's at least supposed to have an impact on everybody, and ultimately to potentially pull all of us in. Public deliberation is a bigger field in some other countries, particularly in Europe, than it has been in the US, at least in relation to the government. But the last few years, we've seen out of the current administration in Washington, more interest than has historically been present, at least in Washington, in involving the public. So the setting for public deliberation includes these elements. There's generally there's a public policy issue or issues. You have, as often the case in politics, conflicting interest groups that don't agree on what policy should be and would have natural opposition because of what they stand to gain under different policies. There's lots of uncertainty and risk involved, and you can probably think of many issues for which that's the case. There's also a very divergent knowledge and opinions. So apart from the fact that there's intrinsic lack of information through uncertainty, there's different people have different knowledge, and people make different things out of it. So there's a high conflict in beliefs and opinions and knowledge. And in this setting, you have policymakers and or researchers, people who are interested in public opinion or public participation, deciding to do what's called a public consultation. So this is generally, public deliberation refers to these situations of public consultation, but with a twist, which is the deliberative part. So I'm going to try to describe what that is and why it's so difficult to support in software. Some example issues that this has been applied to are healthcare research expenditures, which is the domain that we're working in. There's a large national project that we're part of, which can't say too much about because it's very early stage, but which involves researchers from around the country designing a large experiment to test different techniques for public deliberation. So one of the things about public deliberation is that there are many models of it, how it should work, and there's not a lot of research that tells which techniques are the best, whether they differ in the outcomes they produce, and what could be done to combine them. There's also not a lot that says how those techniques compare with doing similar things online. So we were really brought in to do the online component. But before I get to that, I'll just go through the rest of the issues here. Another big area for public consultation is local development projects. Whenever you have a group of people in a city or local area who are going to be potentially impacted by new buildings or a development, there's actually a whole industry that surrounds that tries to get public buy-in. And so that's one of the contexts for this is outside of the government itself, sometimes the people who want to do the development will gather community members or those who have a stake locally together to kind of participate in the planning in a deliberative exercise. But governments also do this. City governments will convene consultations involving citizens to ask them which of these possible futures in your neighborhood or area is the one that you would like, and there are various techniques that have been developed for this. Environmental regulation, obviously a case of conflicting interests and opinions and uncertainty and risk. There's more online deliberation or online consultation in the US related to regulation in general, including environmental regulation, than any other area, as it turns out. And there's been public consultation too in the form of deliberative polls in that area, but not all consultation is deliberative. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Tax policy, an area where it could be applied to. So the rest of these are more areas that it can be applied to, but has not been so much. Foreign policy, social issues, abortion, gay rights. So basically the whole space of public issues conceivably could be addressed through public consultation. This last category is usually considered to be the least amenable to public consultation because the assumption is people out there know what they think and they're hardened opinions that may be in conflict with each other, but they're not going to gain very much by just shouting at each other. So policymakers are not going to be much informed through a deliberative exercise. Yeah.
How different do you feel the deliberative approach is for replacing focus groups, in other words, bringing in people versus this whole crowdsourced thing? Is that something you might talk to, or?
Well, so I'd like to put that out to you in a minute. So my next slide is starting to get at that. I want to describe what the consultation and process looks like, and this is assuming, for the most part, this deliberative model, but it doesn't have to be. And then I want to put to you why would people want to do this? So be thinking about that as I describe this, and then I'll give my opinion about the relation of this to focus groups and other techniques. So the features of the consultation phase are, first of all, you have to recruit participants from the general public. So that's the public part. If you're recruiting just lawyers or some subpopulation, then it's not public deliberation, it's something else. It might be deliberative, but not public deliberation. Then in brackets, we have, in some cases, distributed briefing materials, which are given in advance to the participants, the people who are going to be in the deliberation exercise. These are informational. They're meant to be neutral overall. So there may be arguments from different sides, but neutral in the sense that you get to hear both sides, or you get to read both sides if they're written materials. And then, especially in the research work, there's often a pre-deliberation polling phase where people express their opinions either after they've agreed to participate in the exercise, but before they've learned anything about it, or just after they've read the briefing materials, but before they've gathered together. So you get some sense, sometimes more than one, of more than one stage before people get into the deliberation of where they are with respect to the issue. And that's important for assessing the impact of the deliberation, which is then usually considered to be the part where people gather in a venue. There's some kind of presentation of the issues to set the stage, and then there's discussion between participants. And the discussion is usually structured. Sometimes people will gather, often in small groups, and then there'll be a process for synthesizing or aggregating the ideas or opinions that come out of those small groups, so that everyone in the room can see summaries of what's happened at all the tables, or a collection of ideas that have emerged. Sometimes there's general discussion. So there are, again, different techniques for doing this, and no general agreement on which is best or whether they empirically produce different results. And then at the end, there's usually either another poll, sometimes the first poll, that asks what people think after this deliberation, or in some cases there's actually a vote or a decision made by the group. So in public consultation that has real impact, the public is actually potentially making policy, and that's happened in a few cases, sometimes in surprising places, like in China. Not the most democratic country in the world, but Chinese government has found it in their interest in a few occasions the last few years to call together the citizenry in a local area to essentially make a democratic decision deliberatively in one of these exercises. And Jim Fishkin at Stanford, the founder of one technique called deliberative polling, has convened these sessions and had a big impact. Okay, so that's public consultation. Now, one question that always comes up is, particularly for researchers who are doing this, why would an official or policymaker, someone who has responsibility for making decisions, want to do this? And we can contrast that with other methods for getting public input. For example, you could just do a poll without any deliberative exercise. You could do what Ted mentioned, doing focus groups, convening small groups in sessions where you find out what people think in general as input to a decision maker, but there's no pretense that you're randomly sampling from a population, which is usually a characteristic of public deliberation, and pulling people in as kind of a representative body to say this is what the public thinks after considered reflection on information. You could put up a website and just have people submit comments. That's happened in the domain of what's called rulemaking, administrative law in the federal government, where there's not really deliberation because people aren't discussing things between each other, but they do have an opportunity to have input by submitting what they know, and then the policymaker reads these and presumably takes them into account. So public consultation actually includes all of those things. Public deliberation is this more special type. I should have called this slide public deliberation. Why would you do public deliberation if you were a policymaker, as opposed to those other techniques?
To say that you're representing the will of the people.
Okay, but you could also say that if you did just a straight poll. You could say it if in using other techniques that didn't. What's the purpose of bringing people together with these briefing materials and having them discuss and then give you their input? Yeah, so actually the key word is informed. You're informed in that case because you've gotten materials that give you more information than the general public, than the average person, and you've had a chance to listen to your fellow citizens representing, perhaps an unbiased sample of the population, say what they think as well. So you know more than most people in that sense. On the other hand, if you're a public official, particularly if you're subject to elections or If you're an appointed official who's appointed by people who are elected, the people who are going to be doing the voting and making a judgment about the quality of your decision have not gone through this exercise. So they may judge your decision on the basis of what the general public thinks, what's called raw public opinion, and not on the basis of having gone through a deliberative exercise. So if you're a politician, you might care more about what the general voters think without putting them through some exercise that is going to change their opinions and make them divergent from what your electors think. So that's a problem for public deliberation. Nonetheless, agencies and politicians, even in some case, are doing this. So, and I don't put this to you as an easy question. I think it's actually a hard question. There are good reasons to do public consultation if you're a researcher, because you want to know, you may want to know, for example, how different informed opinion is from raw opinion. How much do people change their minds, if at all, once they know more? And does a particular process for carrying out that deliberation have a big impact or not? If you're a public official, it's a harder sell. So the fact that there have been any of these consultations that have not just been research, but that have had input into policy is interesting. What I guess I'd say is that for very forward-looking policymakers, they may be, particularly those who are somewhat insulated from the electorate, like in appointed officials who might even carry over from one administration to another. They have perhaps the luxury of thinking in longer terms about what's going to happen with the decisions that they make, and it's difficult to peer into the future. We may be able to know what people think today, but what you may care about is what people are going to think 10 years from now or 20 years from now. What's going to produce a good outcome? If you're forward-thinking enough, then public deliberation starts to look more attractive in that case, because there's often an assumption that your deliberating group is going to be a window onto future opinion after people learn the consequences that they don't currently know about. And so you might think then that a particularly good case for public deliberation would be one in which we're likely to face pressures in the future that we haven't quite experienced on a mass level, that people haven't internalized yet. So that 10 or 20 years from now, even sooner, 5 years maybe, lots of people will be aware of something that only a few are aware of now. And in that case, you both want your population to be the general population, if you're a policymaker, because that's your constituency. And you want them to have exposure to what the general public doesn't yet see. So that's one reason I can think of. Another reason might be that if you can make the argument that informed opinion differs from raw opinion, that when people have really studied an issue and gotten to talk to each other about it, they have different opinions from raw opinion, or from the uninformed opinion. And if you can convince people that the process by which they came to that informed opinion is legitimate, then you can use that as an argument for taking the deliberative or post-deliberation viewpoint as more valid. And so some researchers, like Fishkin, for example, have argued that the public may be influenced by trust, but by a trusted procedure that their fellow citizens have gone through, in the same way that people sometimes trust, or in some situations trust, that a group of legislators who have time to study an issue will make a better decision if they're representing the public than if you just put the question out as a referendum to the public at large, which doesn't have time to do that. Right? So all of this is controversial, but there's some philosophical justification for doing it. And at this point, in this country, public deliberation is a pretty new thing at the level of actual policy making. As I said, there are multiple techniques and people who have promoted those techniques without good data about what the best ones are. So we're kind of in a research phase, but the policymakers also want these initial forays into public deliberation to be useful to them. So we're trying to serve dual purposes with our software, as we have since the beginning, in trying to make something that would be both useful for as a test bed for experiments and that would be usable by the public for their own deliberation in groups. Okay, so our current task with the software that I'm going to describe before I get into it is to provide software to support public consultation and really deliberation in particular, mostly asynchronous, as there's another group that's working on voice, video, synchronous deliberation, and to do that through the web, to enable it through the web. And what we've been asked to do is to create something that can support the experiments that are currently being done, but that also could be just put on the web and enable groups, the population, once it can scale enough, to access the website and just use it. So it could be available both for recruited populations and for anyone who wants to use it eventually. Okay, so this is a slide from a paper that I just wrote about different dimensions of design for deliberation. So to just give you a sense, the next several slides are going to be kind of laying out the space of possibilities here. To give you a sense of how large the number of choices are, and this of course is not definitive or limiting. Okay, so we have different categories here. What's the purpose of the deliberation? What population is going to be targeted? Generally in public deliberation, it's a geographically defined population that's within one polity, like the city of San Francisco or the population of the United States of America. In some cases, it may be regionally based, but generally geographical. Spatiotemporal distance, so whether people are going to be in the same place at the same time or not. The communication medium has a huge range of choices associated with that. And what will happen when you bring people together? What process are you going to put them through? So over on the right, you can see all the dimensions that, certainly not all the ones that could be there, but the ones that I have looked at in the empirical literature to help inform design based on experiments and other research that people have done so far. So to go through them just briefly, the outcome, if we look at the purpose, the outcome of a deliberation could be either a decision or people's opinions being possibly changed, or it could be just more like a brainstorming exercise. So brainstorming is kind of a form of deliberation where people talk to each other and then they come up with ideas. They're not necessarily taking a position on an issue. It could be trying to affect things at either the group or the individual level. So if the group has significance, then they may be making a decision. For example, individuals are more likely to just have their beliefs affected or their ideas. The recruitment can either be selected or random. It can also be just self-selected as a subcategory of self-selected. The audience can be public or private. So it could either be the case that everybody can see what's going on or can happen behind closed doors, so to speak. In the online space, you have the option to either do face-to-face deliberation that's supported with online tools in the same space, like we have here, with me sharing the screen, or it can be done totally remotely with telecommunications of some sort, generally the internet. It can either be synchronous or asynchronous. So same place, same time, different place, different time, and all the combinations. Then within the communication medium question, what modalities are we going to facilitate? Speech, text, images, multimodal. How much emotional expression are we going to facilitate, or are we going to impede it? How much fidelity is our medium going to give to participants? Are we going to, if for example in a virtual reality space where people have avatars, those could be modified, transformed, so that you're not seeing a faithful image of the person that you're looking at. And people like Jeremy Valentin at Stanford have done experiments looking at what happens in environments that don't have fidelity, that are transformed. The process itself could be either moderated or unmoderated. It can have a lot of structure to it, or it can be free form. People can be identified, or they can be anonymous. You can have rewards for participating, some sort of incentive system, or no reward. So lots of different choices to make for the deliberation designer. We want our platform to be able to support all these possible choices. We don't want to constrain researchers or policymakers with respect to at least this set of design dimensions.
A quick question.
Yep.
Does your decision category include consensus formation? Because that can be very different from voting versus consensus.
Right. So yeah, within then just decisions itself is a huge space of possibilities, from unanimity or consensus to majority rule to 2/3 to all the various voting rules that have been adapted over the years. That's actually an interest of mine, social choice theory, bringing the insights of the formal study of collective decision making into this environment. In part because computers make possible much more complicated systems for doing decision making than have been, or systems with a lot more bookkeeping than we could really handle in the past. And whether that's a good idea to bring those in, whether people will trust them or understand them, whether we can do it in a secure way, and under what conditions, are all very important questions. Good.
So this beautiful slide, and I would imagine that there'd be another slide that would kind of take the next step, which is to say what the experimental experiences with hidden various kinds of psychological,
right,
falling out of the sky, or whatever decisions people are making, and contrast and compare. Is that extra part of the table exists somewhere?
Yeah, so it does, but I didn't bring it. This comes from a paper which is on my website. That's going to be a chapter in a book called Democracy in Motion, coming out from Oxford University Press, I think later this year. And so you can look at that. Its title is, probably to change the title online, but it's Online Deliberation Design, Choices, Criteria, and Evidence. And it goes through the empirical literature that we were able to find bearing on all these questions, on the effects of different decisions within these dimensions on deliberation quality, on what types of outcomes you get, on satisfaction, a whole range of dependent variables. So it was an attempt to say for deliberation designers what the literature says, but it's actually, there's already a huge literature, and we weren't able to cover all of it, I'm sure, despite the fact that we tried. Okay. So I would refer to that paper. This is also from that paper. So it does summarize what I thought was one of the important insights that comes out of the literature that actually comes from HCI and computer-supported cooperative work people like Bob Kraut from your university. There's a general field called media capacity theories, which it refers to, or media richness is a variety of that looks at the effects of different levels of richness in media. And this slide shows media that vary in richness along 2 dimensions. So these are all two-way communication media that vary along the horizontal axis expressiveness, which we've identified with the modality, and on the rows, interactivity, which we identify with cotemporality. So low interactivity is asynchronous communication. High interactivity is completely synchronous, and then there's an in-between space like instant messaging, which has some features of both, could be used as both. Similarly, with modality or expressiveness, you have the low expressiveness case, which would be text, moderate is speech, and high is video. So this is our way of representing that. Yeah.
So a lot of people talk about audiovisual materials and for a long time because you know, people, when they first made movies, the next goal was to make sure that there was an audio track. So we always hear about video mail, and we always assume that's audio video, right?
Yeah,
audio
I'm assuming there's audio.
But we very rarely talk about the combination of just text plus voice without any video at all. And you know, of course, that's becoming more and more available and easy to implement. And I wonder, where would you put that? Isn't that more expressive than both text and speech? So wouldn't it go in between your two right-hand columns there?
Well, so I'm taking video to kind of include all possibilities. Like in this room, so in this room we have text on the screen that could be captured in a video. We're talking to each other, that's part of the video.
So certainly captioned audiovisual materials would be on the far end of the table, the far right.
Sure.
But if you don't have video, you just have the speech and the text. I'm not so
Oh,
sure
so that would, yeah, you're right, that would be somewhere in between, but you're saying it's actually richer?
I don't know on which side of the far right column that would fall, but maybe we can talk about that later.
Yeah, so this is not intended to be exhaustive. There are certainly intermediate possibilities like that. I didn't put still images, for example, which aren't text. But the general finding of media richness is that as the task space gets, as your task gets more equivocal, more ambiguous, what you're supposed to do, then people tend to gravitate toward richer media. So they're moving from the upper left corner from email down, somewhere down toward video conferencing as a more appropriate medium for working things out. So that maybe a good way to get into that is to just look at the next few slides here. So discussions using whatever media, sure.
That's why I asked one question. Isn't there also an efficiency dimension? So, for example, text-based communication for well-educated people who read well is much more efficient than those other modalities.
Right. So that's probably a good way to talk about this issue also of text and voice. In that paper, this is addressed. There's been findings that show that people who are highly literate prefer to get intake of information by reading, but they prefer to speak in production. So different modalities are preferred for producers and recipients, at least in the population that are fluent and good at reading. And that's probably due to information capacity limitations and things like that. I mean, the paper goes into a little bit the psychology of why this might be true. But I think this is definitely, these are important observations that the designers of these platforms will need to take into account, not just for deliberation, but for all, the future in general of the web. As speech recognition technology becomes better and better, and it's already pretty good, we have the option of interacting in whichever way we choose, or at least between voice and text. And how are people going to make those decisions? And if you're not supporting both, is your platform going to be adequate for your users? Was that roughly what you were thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's in that space. I think efficiency just adds
Sure. So you might say, well, why would you ever use something that's on the upper left there? This work in the applications of media capacity to collaborative writing that was done by Kraut and others addresses that. So for example, if you are trying to communicate with your coworkers about a problem that you both understand well, you often will find email is a more efficient medium because neither side is having to deal with extraneous factors. So you don't have to worry about the bug on my shoulder or little expressions on my face that may not be relevant or that I don't want you to take as relevant. So I can control more carefully what you see and pay attention to, and it frees you up to just focus on that too if we use email. So having richer media puts more demands on us as recipients, and as a producer, it puts more demands on me to worry about whether my hair looks okay. And not that I do that, but very much. But to the extent that people worry about the appearance of things affecting the communication, there's more demand with higher rich media. Okay, so there are various trade-offs and reasons why people will prefer these, apart from just the traditional efficiency criteria, which have to do with things like Shannon information and channel capacity and things like that. Obviously, those are important. But even our own brains are very affected by capacity issues. One reason why I think media richness and media capacity kind of go together. Okay, so discussions, which is really the type of activity we're talking about here, can differ along a few different dimensions. They can be purposive or not. We can be just having a conversation that's free-flowing. We don't have any shared goal. We're just chatting on one end of the spectrum. On the other end, we could have a very clear purpose. We're solving a specific problem that we understand, and then there are all kinds of things in between. Do you have a question? No. Can also relatedly vary along the dimension of equivocality, which is essentially the ambiguity of what we're trying to do. How easy it is for us to agree, to the extent that there's a purpose, do we agree about what it is, or how's our task defined? And we can be at different points in the spectrum of conflict. We may be totally on the same page about everything, our beliefs, our goals, or we may have completely conflicting ones. And in particular, when there's conflict, I'm going to distinguish between conflict in goals and conflict in beliefs, and suggest the following rough typology or terms to go with different situations of conflict that we might be in. So if in the upper left category there, we agree about what we believe, the facts, and we have similar goals, then I claim that's a good situation for what's called cooperation. We're just trying to coordinate, we're trying to figure out how to make this work, and we're friendly about our opinions, they're roughly the same, and our goals are roughly the same. We're just basically cooperating, coordinating. We might agree about what the goal is, but differ in our beliefs about the world or how to achieve it. And so in that case, that's a situation where we might want to have a debate. So I give the reasons why I think the world is this way, you give the reasons why you think it's another way, and then if we're sharing the same goals, hopefully that will feed back into some change in our opinion that will let us converge. So the debate need not be held in an auditorium with the audience deciding who wins. It could be a friendly argument that we're having in which we're ultimately going to converge on an opinion after hearing each other's views and arguments. Alternatively, we might actually already agree about most of our beliefs. We agree what the underlying situation is and what the outcomes are going to be if we take different actions, but we have different goals. I want one thing and someone else wants another. For example, I want a low price in paying for something and someone else wants me to pay a high price. We agree that the outcome of the transaction is going to be the exchange of this good, and we may agree about what the good is and so on. So we don't have very much belief conflict, but we have high goal conflict. So that's a situation I'm calling negotiation, or bargaining even, where we have to come to some sort of agreement that is in the space we can both live with. And finally, what I'm calling the situation of deliberation is where we have high conflict in both beliefs and goals. So this is the most difficult one of all, where we don't agree about what we think is the case factually, and we also have different goals. So it's especially vexing because we can't tell often when we disagree whether it's because we disagree about beliefs or goals. And from a game theoretic perspective, we may even have incentive to misrepresent that. You know, to say, well, the real problem here is we both want the same thing, but we disagree about what the outcome would be, and whereas there might actually be underlying conflict in goals too. So that's the characteristic of a lot of the public policy space that makes it so difficult, is this multidimensional disagreement about both beliefs and goals, and of course multiple beliefs and multiple goals. So I just made this up, and it's not. I mean, people apply these terms rather loosely, but I'm saying if there's a cluster around each of them, it could be characterized in this way. All right, now I'm going to switch gears a bit. How are we doing on time?
We've got 5 or 10 more minutes.
Oh, okay, so not a lot. Okay, so I spent most of my time talking about the
So
design space.
basically, we have to be out of the room at 2.
I see. Okay. All right. So we have this software called Deme, which was designed originally with deliberation in mind, but which, after trying to design something that was specific to that, we concluded after a few tries we needed something that was more general purpose. So I could talk about why we decided that, but I think first it's better to give you a high-level task list. We want to support content management for the social web. So we have a tool that is basically a framework. It could be, you could compare it to Drupal if you want. Think about it as a kind of souped up, more modern version of Drupal, which was designed before Web 2.0 initially. Another thing we want to facilitate is control by users. So I'm going to define each of these things in a minute. We want to support flexible access control for groups, and I probably won't have much time to talk about that, but we have a paper on that from CTS 2010 last year, which is online. We want to be a platform for online deliberation, which means we want to support the kind of goal and belief conflict situation that we're talking about here, and the public consultation process that I described earlier. And we want to support these experiments, meaning comparing different methods for public deliberation, all in this tool. Deme is a term that comes from ancient Athens. The demes were the political divisions, like the neighborhoods, that sent representatives to the pnyx, which is the hill in Athens where people were randomly selected by their localities to come and represent them in this kind of early form of lottery democracy that people like Fishkin have written about. Okay, so the social web. This is it looks like really switching gears, but this is our software. So we think about the social web as being characterized by user-generated social content, by social networking, having relationships with other people and having that represented in the tool, by collaboration, which could be thought of as a general term for those 4 categories that I mentioned, and cross-platform data sharing of all different sorts, supporting multiple login methods, web services, connecting to other websites, and so on. and other platforms. All right, so Deme, did I miss a slide? Yeah, I think I did. Okay, so that one didn't show up. There's a slide that defines each of these terms on the left, which didn't somehow get pasted in correctly. I'm not going to have time to go through this basically, but the architecture of Deme tries to fulfill a number of desiderata that we argue in a paper that we did a couple years ago, it's also online, are important for the social web. So we support, basically we try to support independence of the content in our system from the particular local installation and from where it lives on the web compared in relation to all other sites that it might interact with. We want something that works well with data sharing and is reinstallable and that people can take their data away from and install somewhere else and still have everything work. And also one that is appropriate to the web in that it's based on, there's a lot of pointers in Deme as opposed to the traditional file system, right? So where the basic level of organization in Deme is the item rather than the file, and items can be organized into collections and can be parts of multiple collections rather than a file being in a folder and so on. Yeah.
Instead of the whole software architecture, could I ask you, since we're running low on time, just
Sure.
to focus on how you support questions for polling, the resulting polling. For example, if you use multiple choice on a budget item, that allows for leading questions, but if you use the arithmetic mean, that allows outliers to have disproportionate control of the value. So for budget items, you almost always have to use the medium. On the other hand, if you're electing a single seat, maybe instant runoff is better than first past the post. So could you concentrate on that particular portion and how you've been approaching it?
Okay, well, I don't have a slide for that, but why don't I try to get through the rest and then I'll try to address that because we.
Anyway, take a couple of minutes to complete because that's all you have.
Yeah. Okay.
And then we can maybe take a couple questions.
Okay. All right. So I will try to address that because we have thought about that. We have. Okay. So we have this is Deme is sorry. Got a delay. Maybe it's the dope. All right, so Deme is okay. Deme is organized into a item type hierarchy. So it's really an attempt, if you want a quick summary, to bring object-oriented design to the non-programming administrator of a web application. So they can do things through the web in an object-oriented way with full class hierarchy that represents what's going on in the code in an object-oriented system. And so I'm not going to have time to go through that. I do want to talk a little bit about control by users. So here's an example. Here are examples of things that users might want to do on the social web. And I think you'll start to see the connection with online deliberation. So a user wants to know how data are being collected and used. They want to control the privacy of their data and want to see how their data are used. They want to control whether data are publicly shareable. They want the freedom to move their data from one host or platform to another, to control who can read or edit their data. They want to be able to edit and delete the data they've created, to know how a platform works. They want to be able to install, use, and modify the software, and they want to design the design of the platform to reflect their needs. So those are all things that people might want. Most of the social software that's available out there doesn't provide very much of this, or it provides it in only limited ways. So we're trying to make it more explicit. That's out of order. All right. So we define this paradigm called control by users that is also, there's more about this on my website. but that builds in some principles and tries to support them within Deme. So we try to support full privacy control, portable data, creative control. It's very free software licensed under the Affero General Public License, and participatory design. And then in a very strong version of control by users, you could have user governance. In some ways, Wikipedia has this. So but we want to make it really facilitated by the tools. For example, what you were saying. So, so now I will answer or try to answer the question about different techniques for getting user input into a decision. The short answer is that we're not taking a position initially on what methods of decision making should be used in particular situations. What we want to do instead is to support the full space of possibilities that people might want to investigate or use. So for researchers, that means we can do experiments with different methods, different voting rules, different ways of eliciting preferences from people, and see whether they produce different results. For a public policymaker or for a group that just wants to use this as a platform for their own group's decisions, we want to support whatever their process is. So if they do things by consensus, we want to support that. If they vote, we want to support that. And so we don't really have a position on what method should be used for each use case. I'd be happy to talk about it, but okay, so I guess we have a few minutes.
Yeah, I guess I would encourage people to ask questions, but you know, this idea that to start with, if there's a need for a structure to enable this deliberative work is kind of, I think, is the underpinning of Deme, right? It's we're gonna make a place, a gathering spot, a tool, and you know, there's various people making very popular communication tools, yes, you know, social networking tools, how do you who do you expect to come to yours, and what's going to make it sticky?
Right. So, well, one group we expect to come is the people involved in these experiments. So we have we already have a constituency, a small constituency of website users on the few websites that are running our platform tool. We want to support public deliberation in this experiment, so that's our immediate task. But you could think of Deme as a more general platform for the social web, like others that are being developed or that are already highly in use, like Facebook, Diaspora. I think there's been a lot of dissatisfaction with the lack of user control in Facebook and most of the commercial tools that are out there. So our main selling point, if we go in the direction of trying to make this a widely used tool, I think would be the ability of users to control their data and their experience in the ways that we talked about, and to participate in even in the governance of the project.
So this thing is available. People can build on top of it. They can use it for their experiments today. Is that
right?
That's
yeah. One way you could think of it. So I'm a big admirer of Wikipedia, which is I think a highly successful piece of software that is done on a nonprofit basis and use lots of volunteer labor. Wikipedia has technical limitations in the software, and it's not a tool whose full use is available to people who are not power users. It also doesn't have the kind of special tools that we're trying to build into Deme, and we thought we needed a different architecture that's more flexible than a wiki. So you could think of Deme architecturally as a generalization of the wiki idea. You could implement something like Wikipedia in principle in Deme just by making very broad permissions to edit things, but we can do a lot more besides. So I guess we don't have a lot.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I got one question. So this is actually going back, not really. You mentioned about, you talked about capacity and media richness. How is media richness measured?
Well, it's not, I don't know that there's a rigorous measure of it. It's used more, defined operationally as the dimension along which these media vary, going from text to video and the things in between. But it's basically, it has to do with the capacity requirements for producing and processing.
I'm thinking in terms of things like Hicks law and Fick's law, et cetera, when we talk about information capacity. So I was wondering what would be the metric?
Yeah, so you could, if you wanted, you could define it in terms of informational capacity requirements in the strict sense. That's not the way, this term comes out of communication research, which is a social science discipline where they don't speak in those terms.
They do talk about Hicks law.
Yeah, they do, that's true.
There's another question.
Yeah, this is, maybe you don't have it here, but I'm just wondering how you might have thought about stratifying your audiences in a way that basically not every audience, not everybody who's participating is going to want to be a designer,
right?
Tinkerer with the interface and all of the background stuff. So it just seems to me that you know, have you? That's my question. Have you stratified this according to like 3 or 5 different user types?
So the question is whether we've stratified the design to accommodate different user types, including those who do not want to modify the software, and which is most people, obviously. So we haven't come up with a specific typology for that. Our approach is to try to hide functionality that most people, not hide, but make obscure without making it unavailable, the features that only power users are really going to want to use. But right now, the interface is pretty bare on the actual Deme sites. We have a lot of underlying functionality in the back end, but the front end interface support really needs development. So that's what the students are going to be working on this summer.
So progressive relationships with Deme. And thank you very much for coming. I think we can talk about it. Is there a demo that maybe Chris can show?
So you can all go to deme.stanford.edu, and that shows the current version. It's written in Django, and you can play around with it. If I give you an account, then you can play around with it more. But we also have it runs our own program's website, symsys.stanford.edu. And if you go to groupspace.org, that's the host site for the earlier version of Deme that gives a lot more of the philosophical background, which is still present in the project related to online deliberation. It also shows the past versions, which were written in PHP and Ruby on Rails.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. And come out and have a soda and some cookies. We'd like to move away from the podium and out to the